The Callisto protocol looks more like this than that. With absolutely jaw-dropping visuals, the Callisto protocol demands to be respected as this year's big AAA survival horror game developed by a brand new dev team founded by the co-creator of Dead Space. And Dead Space, this game definitely is trying to be. Like The Order 1886, it may be the best looking game of the year, with a fascinating world accompanied by stellar art direction where every corridor oozes with dreadful atmosphere and space. Lots and lots of space ooze. However, also like The Order 1886, it flatlines in the gameplay department, especially during the first half. The game begins with the protagonist Jacob being wrongfully thrusted into a massive space prison in the planet Callisto, where it just so happens that a zombie-like outbreak occurs just as he arrives. Callisto has bad pacing, with a prologue chapter that rushes to get the player inside the prison already, and then is immediately followed by a slow burn to get players up to speed with the gameplay. The biggest deviation from Dead Space that Callisto risks everything on is its melee combat that is painstakingly simplistic. Dodging occurs by holding the left stick either left or right when an enemy attacks, and Jacob will effortlessly dodge their strikes. No need for precise timing, no need for studying enemy attacks. As long as the player is holding the stick left or right when the enemy attacks, Jacob will dodge. Being this capable of avoiding damage in a survival horror game kneecaps all the tension. The developers must have understood this because the game resorts to cheap tricks to try and damage players and raise the challenge. Undodgeable grab attacks will strike out of nowhere with virtually zero time to react. Doors will jump scare you with enemy attacks. Enemies off screen will take swings at you. All bosses kill the player in one hit to punish every mistake. Focusing on melee was not the right choice for this game. When guns are introduced, they spice up the combat encounters a bit further, and after a few player upgrades are unlocked, combat encounters finally start to get interesting. Finishing off a melee combo with a shotgun blast, or trying to shoot the tentacles off enemies before they transform into tougher ones briefly became an engaging combat dance worth partaking. But it takes way too long to get there. As a huge Dead Space fan, first impressions were awful, and by the time I started enjoying myself, I was already halfway done with the game. I usually prefer shorter games that respect my time over games that are bloated and exhausting, but despite it being a short game, Callisto Protocol still feels like it's stretching out its runtime. Not only does the game take way longer than it should to open up and teach the player everything it has to offer, but it is riddled with drawn-out walking, crawling, and shimmying through tight corridors that add little to the experience. There are audio log collectibles littered throughout that have to be listened to in the menus, and the worst part is, these audio logs are superfluous and don't have anything important to say that elevates the story. Not like the story is going to do much to persuade players to hit the credits anyway. For a game that boasts about its cast, none of the characters are personable enough to care for. It's a 9-hour game that only has 5 hours worth of content at best. It doesn't help that the checkpoints are terrible too. There are no true save states. The player is a slave to the checkpoint system, which likes to put players back before the point where they upgraded their equipment, making them have to purchase upgrades all over again each time they die. Sometimes an entire side path of progress will be reset because the game checkpointed before the player entered that room. Checkpointing sparingly for difficulty's sake is noble, but this is not that. This only serves to annoy the player. I know I mentioned side paths in this game, but don't let that fool you. This is a linear game. Just like my thoughts on game length, I'm not opposed to linear game design like this, but the game has no way of telling the player which hallway leads to progression, and which hallway is an entire side area with worthwhile loot that just confuses players. Regardless, many of the side rooms will be empty, leading to a largely unrewarding experience even if the player indulges in the limited side content. The Callisto Protocol fails to capture what made Dead Space so compelling, and it fails to stand on its own 2 feet with a lackluster melee system that takes too long to flesh itself out. Just like my thoughts on The Order 1886 back in the day. I hope the potential sequel can learn from the mistakes of this game and deliver, because there is an inkling of a good game hidden inside, somewhere, waiting to chest burst out.
Patch sealed. Beginning pressure check.
What a thrill. With darkness and silence through the night.
Damn thing.
what a thrill. I'm searching and I'll melt